There was recently an article on CBR.com, and in principle, I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with what Ashley Land has to say. But the harsh reality of C-list characters in indie comic books it doesn't make for what he's trying to point out here as a way forward for the comic book industry to actually be a fruitful endeavor or a way forward that will actually grow anything. And here talking to me about that is my good friend Doc. How you doing, buddy?
This is a fucking pipe dream article. It just doesn't bear any sort of proof in reality.
The name of the article is, Would Marvel and DC be better if readers tried out new titles? And the answer is absolutely yes. If people tried out new titles, there'd be everything would be better for everybody and everyone would make more money. But I don't think they've given people a reason to try out new titles. And when they have done that, I think they've dropped the ball so many times that people are jaded and they're just not going to dip their toes in the stuff they're just not comfortable with. That's why me personally, and I would give this advice to any new comic book fan or even an old fan, do not get attached to the characters at all in any way, shape, or form. There's no consistency. There's no continuity. There's no baseline set of quality associated with Batman, Superman, X-Men, Spider-Man, even the A-list characters out there. If you want to have a nice, enjoyable comic book reading experience, find your favorite writer, find your favorite artist, and then watch them hop around from title to title every 6 to 12 months, or sometimes you'll get a 24-month run, and you'll be happier that way because you happen to like that particular writer. There is no standard of excellence associated with DC or Marvel, even with their best characters.
I agree that you would be happier. I just don't think that there will be anybody left reading comics. The few people that will be left would be happy, but there wouldn't be any comics being made to make them happy because...
And inherently, that's the problem with the argument that's being made here, and we'll get into some of the details, is that's not how comic book fans really work. That's how some comic book fans work, but that's not how most comic book fans work. They get attached to a character, they get attached to a team, or maybe a set of characters or a corner of that universe, and they want to see it grow and they want to stick with it. And the publishers just aren't doing their job to make sure that those people are satisfied. That's the main reason things aren't going well. Let's get into some of these details, Doc. Understandably, people with a long-term emotional and financial investment in the likes of Batman, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, and X-Men can take what they see as bad creative direction personally. The last 10 years have been plenty of developments that have turned readers away from their most treasured series, and some vow never to return. However, many readers sadly continue to make one key mistake. They don't migrate towards different titles to see if they can find what they're looking for in new heroes and creators. Even while fans are lambasting high-profile runs, brilliant stories are falling by the wayside. As a customer, if Marvel can't get Spider-Man right, if Marvel can't get X-Men right, if Marvel can't get Batman right or Superman right, their A-list characters, their A-list titles, the flagship titles over those companies, why would I ever trust that they're actually going to get Hawkman right? Why would I ever trust that they're going to get Ant-Man right if they don't even care about the important shit?
Yeah, you are correct. Although you were saying that Marvel getting Batman and Superman right.
Whatever, I got it.
I know. But look, the thing that draws people into being a superhero fan is creativity. Yeah, the creative team. Absolutely. Consistent plot. Yeah, like an ongoing kind of narrative. And the characters. And expecting them to just jump over to the Terrifics because Fantastic Four sucks right now. I think you're asking way too much because that's not the way people are wired.
There's a reason that Superman, Batman, the X-Men, and Spider-Man are the flagship comic book characters and teams of the entire industry because they have the most wide range appeal. That's been borne out over decades upon decades. These are the characters that most people can identify with and would like to watch them on their adventures. If you're not a sci-fi guy, you might not like Green Lantern because it's more of a niche genre within superheroes themselves. And these are the characters that are the biggest characters because they have the most appeal.
And because they can basically kind of get plugged into almost any other of the niche genres.
Ashley then went on to give some examples, and I think he's a little bit off base here for a couple of reasons. While the fan reception on some major titles continues to be hit or miss, lesser-known books continue to struggle to reach people. Nowhere was this more true in recent years than DC's New Age of Heroes initiative. The basic concept here was to create a slew of new titles aimed at prospective new readers following new heroes with all A-list talent. The stories even borrowed directly from the Marvel's formula to try to appeal to readers from both publishers, yet the effort fell flat despite positive fan reactions for every title in the imprint. Now, I would definitely disagree with positive fan reaction for every title. Not all of them were good. Me personally, I really like The Terrifics, which is basically the best Fantastic Four comic book you could get at the time. I really like Damage, which was the best Hulk book you could get until Immortal Hulk came out. And then I also liked Silencer, which was a brand new character. They had a couple of other ones that were decent, but those are the three that really stood out for me. And as somebody that's a DC fan, and I did buy into New Age of Heroes, and I checked out all the titles, within 6 issues, all the artists, which were like the headliners on all the books, had left. So DC couldn't even stick to the initiative for like half a year. They already abandoned it. One half an issue is all Jim Lee could do before he brought in his villain artist.
I did like Sideways. It was a pretty good, interesting book, but it didn't feel like it fit in the DCU. And I think a lot of these books,
and Kenneth Rocafort didn't stay on that book very long.
Yeah, he didn't stay on the book either. A lot of these titles, these New Age of Heroes, didn't feel like they fit within the DC universe. Nobody buys a Squadron Supreme comic over in Marvel when it's regularly published, and nobody's going to buy a bunch of Marvel heroes in the DC universe when they're regularly published, no matter how good the talent is temporarily. And that's what it was. It was they temporarily shoved some good talent on there, and that was pretty good. I mean, I liked it. When it became clear that they weren't even going to stick to it for a year, why would I think that there was any chance in this quarter of the DCU actually sticking around when you already have the solicits out for issue 6 and 7 and 8? When 3 is hitting the shelf, you already see, oh yeah, all that A-list talent, they're already gone. You don't care about this, so why should I continue reading it?
There's another example here, and this one actually kind of makes me mad. Not your fault, Ashley. It makes me mad at DC. Between them, Marvel and DC have around 100 titles in print at any given time. Of course, series like Amazing Spider-Man, Batman, and X-Men grab the most readers, often moving over 100,000 comics when they're at their best. These comics can even manage to sell impressively well amidst fan outrage. However, at the same time, comics almost universally praised by readers and critics alike can perform too poorly to stay in print. This sadly was the case with titles like Robert Venditti and Brian Hitch's Hawkman. As classic a superhero story as Eddie, its run was only selling around 15,000 copies at its low point. Whether the issue was marketing, events, or second-tier hero, the overwhelming consensus on the title's storytelling points to a book that was a casualty of readers who avoid new stories. I take a little bit of umbrage with that one. Hawkman was doing very well. It was selling above 30,000 copies an issue. It got interrupted for about 6 months by Year of the Villain, which has nothing to do with Hawkman. There wasn't even a story about that. It's just something that Scott Snyder created, so everyone else had to kind of go through it. It interrupted the story that Robert Venditti was telling after Brian Hitch left it, which certainly didn't help. Now, let's say, Doc, you didn't really know Hawkman, you didn't really like him, but you got into Robert Venditti's Hawkman, and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm Hawkman for life. I can't wait for what they're going to do next. What's the next thing that they do with the character? Absolutely nothing. He never comes back. And the next time you get a solo book associated with a Hawk character, Hawk Girl, it's Jadzia Axelrod's Hawk Girl 3 years later, which is so porous and so pathetic, it's embarrassing. That's the best word I can come up to describe the effort from Jadzia Axelrod in Hawk Girl. Why? If I'm a new fan, a new reader, and I invested in the Hawk family, wouldn't I feel like the biggest dumbass in the world right now after I went from Robert Venditti's Hawkman, which is amazing, to Jadzia Axelrod's Hawk Girl, which is embarrassing?
Yeah, I'd feel like an asshole too. It boggles the mind that anyone could think, oh yeah, well, we got this reader to buy this once. Now they are blindly going to buy it forever, regardless of who's on it, what the story is, how close or different from a take it is than the other ones. The whole premise here is the idea that somehow something else can fail you into success. It doesn't make any goddamn sense, and they wonder why it pushes readers away.
if you invest in a character, it's going to be interrupted constantly, ad nauseum, by events. It doesn't matter if it's fucking Hawkman. C-list character, great character, doesn't need to be in every DC Comics event. Interrupted by Year of the Villain. So you're always going to get interrupted by events, even if the writer's doing something good. And then once they leave, because they never stay for very long anymore, it's going to be completely rebooted with a new writer that you're probably going to hate, that takes it in a direction that makes no sense. So they're incentivizing people to not invest in any of these characters. I think that's the big thing that I'm trying to get across when it comes to DC and Marvel. He also had something to say with indie comic books that I don't think makes any sense whatsoever. The indie comic scene offers plenty of variety, including the occult detective world of Hellboy, the horror-themed superheroes of Spawn, or Golden Age sci-fi at Black Hammer. Some of these comics take what Marvel and DC do so well and do it even better. Rather than passively buying a series you hope will improve, regardless of its quality, actively buying a series that shows what fans want from comics is the way to go. Not everybody wants to read a horror book or horror-based, a cult book like Hellboy, which has very indie art. I love Mike Mignola. That art ain't for everybody. When you talk about Spawn, Todd McFarlane has done an amazing job bringing great artists on Spawn. That is a horror-themed superhero comic book. Not everybody that reads superheroes wants to read horror. You have to kind of like both to really get into Spawn. And it is doing well because it is Todd McFarlane. And then you talk about like Black Hammer. Not everybody's looking for a shared superhero universe with an edgy spin on it like The Boys. If that was the case, The Boys would have been the number one comic book in the world there for a while with Garth Ennis. These are very niche down versions of what DC and Marvel are doing, so they can do more exciting things that are really groundbreaking that you couldn't do at Marvel or DC, but they would never have the overall appeal and the wide amount of people that would get into them because they are niche down too much.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, graphic storytelling in and of itself is a niche medium. Then you go into the superhero genre, which is the largest of a niche media. Then you start getting into horror, you start getting into regular sci-fi, then golden age sci-fi, where you're going back. Now you're relying on nostalgia, often nostalgia for something that you never even experienced yourself. You're going for fractions of the population. And guess what? When you don't have a big budget, when you don't have a large IP, you can be more experimental. Congratulations. You just learned what art house cinema is.
And that's why Amazing Spider-Man, Batman, Superman, X-Men, having not only the very best writers, the very best editors, and the very best artists on all those books is so important. All those books need to be of the highest quality, because once those are big sellers, people get excited. They're in their comic book shop every Tuesday, every Wednesday, and then they go pick up a Hellboy and they realize, oh, there's something else out there for me that's absolutely amazing. They go pick up a Robert Venditti Hawkman, and instead of bottoming out at 15,000 copies sold at its lowest moment, maybe the lowest it actually reaches is 30,000, because people are so overwhelmingly happy with Superman and Batman that they're buying the auxiliary titles as well. That's how you build them up. That's how you build up new creators. That's how you build up new characters. And maybe they rise up and they become B-list characters, maybe even an A-list character or something like that. Without your tentpole characters being great at all times, none of this can work.
Yeah, I mean, look, Gail Simone a couple of years ago was talking about how she was intentional, that her and her generation were chopping down the tent poles. Bitch, do you know what happens when the tent poles fall? So does the fucking tent. And that's what they're doing. They're trying to expect Marvel and DC's big flagship books. Failure is their opportunity for success. No, all it did was drop the whole tent on everybody's head.
Is they're not reading their Batman and Superman because the stories aren't great right now. Superman's better than Batman. They're buying them because it's a compulsive habit, and they always buy Batman, and they're just putting it into the long box and then moving on with their lives because they're not satisfied with their comic book reading experience. And that's why they're not looking around and going, man, what am I going to do after I read Batman right now? Because they're never going to read it in the first place a lot of times. They're just putting it in a bag and board and leaving it.
That's why you need to have great talent, great storytelling, great everything on the characters that people have identified with, just so that they're actually intentionally walking into the store to buy something. They're not just I mean, he makes a great point. Don't just passively buy the thing that you've always bought. No, you got to actively buy that thing.
If I show up with $40 in my pocket, DC and Marvel should do everything in their power to make sure I leave with zero. Like, oh my goodness, I only had $40. I actually had to put 2 things back that I wanted to read this week because I didn't have enough cashola in my pocket today.
If you got $40 in your pocket when you walk in the store, they got to try to convince you that you needed 60 or 80.
That's not happening.
No, it's not even close to happening.
While I do agree with the premise of the article itself, and I almost feel like the way that Ashley Lane is talking about the way comic books should work, almost like socialism. The idea of socialism is absolutely great until you put it into practice, and then it turns out that it just does not work that way. It would be great if what Ashley is trying to sell here was any way that the comic book industry had ever performed ever in the 80-year history of it, 100-year history of it. It's never worked that way. The tentpole titles are the tentpole titles for a reason. They are the most important ones out there. And if they aren't functioning, nothing's really going to function here. And I wish this was the way it was. And I wish people would follow my advice and say, find your favorite writer, find your favorite artist. You'll be happier just following them rather than being attached to the characters. But people do get attached to the characters. That's just the way they collect. That's the way it works.
Yeah, you nailed it. Socialism works as long as you disregard human nature the same way that this article works, only if you disregard human nature and their attachment to the characters.
And one of the terrible byproducts of all the things that are happening at DC and Marvel is people aren't just driven away from Batman or Superman or X-Men or Spider-Man. They just get driven away from comic books in general. And sometimes it's not even really the characters. It can be the creators that drive people away. In fact, I talked to Jimmy, used to have a channel called Comic Quirks. I believe he's called it Cinema Quirks now. I can't really remember, but he walked away from the big two. He had had enough and he wasn't reading anymore. This was about 2 or 3 years ago. I want you to listen to this and see if it isn't the exact same thing people are pissed off about today. Nothing has changed for the better for the most part in like 3 years now. Absolutely pathetic. There's also a link in the video description.